August 9, 1944, 42,000 feet above the English Channel, Captain Jay Zeamer watched his B-17's No. 3 engine tear itself apart in a ball of orange flame. The fire spread across the wing faster than seemed possible. Fuel vapor ignited in brilliant white flashes. The aircraft lurched hard to the right as the propeller, no longer governed, windmilled uselessly in the slipstream. Zeamer's co-pilot, Lieutenant William Vaughan, pulled the fire suppression handle. Nothing happened. The magnesium alloy continued burning with an intensity that made the aluminum skin glow cherry red, even in broad daylight. Below them, 218 American paratroopers packed into 6 C-47 transports prepared for their combat jump into occupied France. They'd already passed the point of no return. The drop zone at Dragoon was 12 minutes ahead. German anti-aircraft batteries waited in concealed positions along the approach corridor. Intelligence estimated at least 40 80mm guns protecting the valley. The Pathfinder aircraft was supposed to arrive first, marking the drop zone with colored smoke before the transport stream reached the target. Without that visual reference, the C-47s would scatter their human cargo across miles of enemy territory, isolated paratroopers against entrenched Wehrmacht positions. The mathematics were brutal. Zeamer's right hand moved to the bailout alarm. Standard procedure demanded it. The crew could still make it out before the fire reached the wing root fuel tanks. He looked down at the transport formation below, maintaining their steady 140-knot approach speed. Sitting ducks without their pathfinder. His hand froze on the alarm switch. What happened in the next 11 minutes would rewrite Air Force doctrine on aircrew decision-making and earn one of the war's most reluctant Medal of Honor recommendations. Operation Dragoon represented the largest amphibious invasion of southern France, timed to support the Normandy breakout by drawing German reserves away from the northern front. The airborne component required absolute precision. Unlike Normandy's nighttime drops that scattered paratroopers across the entire Cotentin Peninsula, these daylight jumps demanded Pathfinder aircraft to mark exact landing zones before the main transport waves arrived. The B-17 Flying Fortress serving as Pathfinder seemed an odd choice for the mission. Designed as a heavy bomber, the aircraft carried specialized radar navigation equipment and smoke marker dispensers in place of its bomb load. More critically, it flew at altitudes the C-47 transports could never reach, allowing Pathfinder crews to spot defensive positions and adjust approach vectors before bringing the vulnerable, lumbering cargo planes into the kill zone. But the B-17's 4 Wright R-1820 Cyclone engines, each producing 1,200 horsepower, created a vulnerability that haunted bomber crews throughout the European theater. Engine fires, the radial configuration with 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows, generated intense heat. Oil leaks were common. A single tracer round penetrating the thin cowling could ignite fuel vapor in seconds. Once started, magnesium alloy engine fires rarely extinguished themselves. Standard procedure was immediate. Feather the propeller, activate fire suppression, and if the fire persisted beyond 30 seconds, abandon the aircraft. The statistics backed up the terror. Between June and August 1944, 8th Air Force records documented 247 B-17s lost to engine fires during combat operations. Only 18 crews survived to be taken prisoner. The rest went down with their burning aircraft, either unable to bail out in time or choosing to stay with wounded crewmen who couldn't jump. Captain Jay Zeamer understood these numbers intimately. At 27, he'd completed 43 combat missions, including the photographing of the heavily defended Japanese base at Buka, during which his previous B-17, Old 666, absorbed over 500 hits during a 45-minute running battle with attacking Zeros. That mission earned him both the Medal of Honor and a reputation among his crews as someone who made calculated decisions under fire rather than following doctrine blindly. For Operation Dragoon's airborne phase, timing compressed everything into brutal simplicity. The Pathfinder had to reach the drop zone at exactly H-hour minus 12 minutes. Mark the zone. Transmit the all-clear signal. The transport stream, already committed to their approach, would reach the marked zone at H-hour. No margin for error, no contingency for equipment failure. What made the August 9th mission particularly critical was the intelligence picture. German forces had reinforced the Draguignan Valley with elements of the 148th Reserve Division after intercepting Allied signals traffic, suggesting airborne operations. Camouflaged 80mm batteries positioned along the likely approach corridors. If the Pathfinder failed to arrive, the C-47s would have to make their drop runs without visual reference points, exposing themselves to concentrated anti-aircraft fire while searching for the correct zone. Mission planners estimated losses would exceed 40%. The Pathfinder crew briefing that morning emphasized one absolute: if anything compromised the aircraft's ability to complete the mission, abort immediately and return to base. Let the backup Pathfinder scheduled to depart 15 minutes later take over. Better to delay the drop by 15 minutes than lose the only aircraft equipped to guide the formation. No one discussed what would happen if both Pathfinders failed. The 218 paratroopers, already airborne in their C-47s, represented weeks of specialized training. They'd studied aerial photographs, memorized German defensive positions, prepared for a specific tactical situation that would evaporate if they missed their window. As Zeamer's crew departed RAF Aldermaston at 0630 hours, the backup Pathfinder sat on the taxiway with a hydraulic leak, estimated repair time 45 minutes. The mission had no backup. The mission had Zeamer. Luftwaffe tactical doctrine in late summer 1944 had shifted dramatically from the aggressive interceptor sweeps of 1942. German commanders, facing fuel shortages and experienced pilot losses, concentrated their remaining fighters around strategic targets rather than wasting resources on harassing individual bombers. Allied Pathfinder aircraft, flying hours ahead of the main bomber streams, typically operated unmolested. German anti-aircraft batteries saved their ammunition for the heavy formations that would follow. This assessment proved catastrophically wrong on August 9th. Zeamer's B-17 had attracted attention not from fighters, but from a newly repositioned battery of 80mm guns near Frejus, positioned to defend against the expected amphibious landings. The gun crews, tracking what they assumed was a reconnaissance aircraft, waited until the B-17 descended to its marking altitude before opening fire. The first salvo missed. The second bracket caught the aircraft's number 3 engine cowling, shearing through the thin aluminum and igniting fuel vapor in the reduction gear housing. For Zeamer's crew, the tactical calculation seemed straightforward. Bail out. The standing orders were explicit. Engine fires were unsurvivable. The aircraft carried 10 men. 9 could escape immediately. The flight engineer, positioned in the top turret, might have seconds more, but abandoning the aircraft meant abandoning 218 paratroopers who were, at that exact moment, passing over the French coast. The backup Pathfinder remained on the ground. No other aircraft carried the specialized radar navigation equipment required to mark the drop zone with the precision necessary for a daylight operation. Without that marked zone, the C-47 formation would either abort, wasting weeks of preparation and giving German forces time to further reinforce, or proceed blindly into the valley where concealed 88mm batteries would massacre the slow-moving transports. Training emphasized crew survival above mission completion. A dead crew accomplished nothing. A living crew could fly again tomorrow. The mathematics were simple. 10 lives versus 218 was no choice at all, when those 10 lives couldn't change the outcome anyway. What the training officers who developed those procedures couldn't have known was that engine fires in B-17s, while usually fatal, occasionally stabilized. If the fuel supply could be cut fast enough, if the slipstream could blow the flames away from vulnerable hydraulic lines, if the wing structure maintained integrity despite the heat, the aircraft might remain controllable. Might. Zeamer looked at his instruments. Airspeed, 185 knots. Altitude, 4,800 feet. Distance to drop zone, 73 miles. The fire had been burning for 45 seconds. The wing skin glowed but hadn't buckled. He still had 3 engines. The aircraft still responded to control inputs. His hand left the bailout alarm. Engineer, cut fuel to number 3 and keep the extinguisher going. Navigator, give me a direct course to Dragoon. Co-pilot, help me hold this heading. The fire continued burning. The fire suppression system on a B-17 consisted of CO2 bottles that, when activated, flooded the engine nacelle with carbon dioxide to smother flames. The system was designed for electrical fires, oil fires, small fuel leaks, not for a catastrophic breach in the fuel delivery system with raw aviation gasoline feeding the flames. Flight engineer Technical Sergeant Robert Quinn emptied the first bottle into number 3's nacelle. The fire dimmed momentarily, then roared back as fresh fuel vapor ignited. Zeamer ordered the fuel selector valves for number 3 closed. This should have starved the fire, but the shrapnel that penetrated the cowling had also damaged the fuel crossfeed lines, allowing gasoline to continue seeping into the nacelle from adjacent fuel tanks. The fire found it immediately. 11 minutes to target, Navigator First Lieutenant James Kendrick called from his station in the nose. His voice carried the tight control of someone performing calculations while watching a wing burn. 40,000 feet. The air temperature outside hovered around minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the unpressurized aircraft, crew members breathed through oxygen masks, their breath frosting instantly in the thin, frigid air. The burning engine created a grotesque contrast, savage heat radiating through the wing structure, while the rest of the airframe absorbed the brutal cold of high altitude. Zeamer reduced power on engines 1, 2, and 4 to 1,800 RPM. This decreased their speed, but also reduced the aerodynamic stress on the damaged wing. The B-17 slowed to 160 knots. He trimmed the aircraft to compensate for the asymmetric thrust, applying constant pressure on the rudder pedals to prevent the dead engine from pulling them into a spiral. The fire spread aft along the wing. Flames licked at the number 2 engine, 60 inches away from number 3's inferno. If number 2's fuel lines ignited, they'd lose half their power on the right side. The aircraft would become uncontrollable. Quinn grabbed the second CO2 bottle. "That's our last one, Captain. Use it." The carbon dioxide blasted into the nacelle. The flames shrank, compressed by the chemical assault. For 10 seconds, Zeamer allowed himself to believe the fire might extinguish. Then he saw the aluminum skin on the wing's upper surface beginning to wrinkle. The intense heat was degrading the structural integrity. The wing was starting to fail. 9 minutes, Kendrick reported. Below them, the 6 C-47s maintained their precise formation, unaware of the drama unfolding 4 miles above. Radio protocol demanded strict silence until the Pathfinder transmitted the marking complete signal. The transport pilots flew their steady course, trusting that the lead aircraft would fulfill its mission. Zeamer descended to 38,000 feet, trading altitude for speed. The increased airspeed pushed the flames backward, away from the fuel tanks in the wing route. The fire continued burning but stopped spreading. The wing skin continued degrading but hadn't buckled. Yet. At 36,000 feet, he leveled off. The stressed wing couldn't handle rapid altitude changes. Every maneuver risked catastrophic structural failure. He maintained a steady, level flight profile despite every instinct screaming to dive away from the burning engine. 7 minutes. The French coast appeared ahead. Zeamer could see the invasion beaches where, within hours, landing craft would pour ashore. The intelligence photos had shown this landscape empty of Allied forces. Now, looking down at the assembly areas, he saw the massive concentration of men and equipment preparing for the assault. Everything depended on the airborne forces securing the high ground inland. Everything depended on those paratroopers hitting their zones. The valleys between the coastal mountains appeared ahead. Dragoon sat in a natural bowl, surrounded by hills perfect for anti-aircraft positions. Kendrick's radar set painted the terrain in green phosphorescent lines. He called course corrections. Zeamer followed them with minute control movements, terrified that aggressive maneuvering would snap the compromised wing. 5 minutes, start your descent to marking altitude. Standard procedure called for the Pathfinder to drop to 12,000 feet for the smoke marker release. This put them well within range of anti-aircraft fire but ensured accurate placement. Zeamer began the descent at 200 feet per minute, gentle, controlled. The wing groaned. Metal stress cracked with sounds like gunshots. The fire had been burning for 8 minutes. The engine pylon, constructed of steel tube framework, was glowing red-hot. The propeller hung motionless, frozen by its feathering mechanism, but the hub assembly was visibly sagging from the heat. If the pylon failed, the entire engine would tear away, likely taking a significant section of wing with it. 3 minutes, beginning target run. The drop zone appeared in the valley below. Kendrick confirmed radar returns matching the pre-briefed terrain features. They were exactly on course. The C-47 formation would arrive in 9 minutes, assuming they maintained schedule. Zeamer descended through 14,000 feet. Anti-aircraft batteries around the valley perimeter opened fire. Black puffs of 88mm shells burst around the aircraft. He ignored them. The burning engine was a greater threat than German gunners. 12,000 feet, ready on markers. Bombardier Second Lieutenant Thomas Walsh lay prone in the nose, his hand on the smoke marker release. He counted down. Altitude. 12,000, approaching release point. Steady, steady. The aircraft shuddered. A particularly violent explosion shook the airframe. Zeamer thought they'd taken a direct hit. Then he realized it was the number 3 engine pylon, finally succumbing to the heat. The engine dropped 6 inches, held only by fuel lines and control cables. It swung in the slipstream like a pendulum. "Mark!" Walsh released the colored smoke markers. Orange smoke billowed from the containers, clearly visible against the green valley floor. The markers fell in a perfect pattern, defining the drop zone with precision the C-47 pilots could follow, even in heavy anti-aircraft fire. "Marking complete," Zeamer transmitted to the transport formation. "Zone is hot. You're cleared for your run." The wing buckled. The upper surface aluminum, weakened by heat, collapsed inward between 2 ribs. The structural failure was catastrophic but not complete. The main wing spar held. Zeamer's transmission reached the C-47 formation at the exact moment their lead aircraft, piloted by Major Richard Davidson, crossed the initial point. Davidson acknowledged immediately and began his run toward the now clearly marked drop zone. The orange smoke billowed in stark contrast to the terrain, exactly where briefing photos had indicated the optimal release point. What happened next revealed a brutal truth about Pathfinder operations that training had never adequately addressed. The Pathfinder aircraft became the primary target for every anti-aircraft battery in the valley once it marked the zone. German gunners understood the tactical system. Kill the Pathfinder and the following transports lose their reference point. The 80mm batteries concentrated their fire on Zeamer's crippled B-17. Shells burst in clusters, walking toward the aircraft with methodical precision. Standard evasive procedure called for aggressive jinking, random altitude and heading changes that threw off gunners' calculations. Zeamer's damaged wing made such maneuvers suicidal. He held his course, maintaining altitude and heading to give the C-47 pilots a stable visual reference as they began their drops. The first transport reached the release point. Green lights illuminated in the cargo bay. Paratroopers shuffled toward the door. Walsh, still in the nose, radioed altitude and wind corrections to help Davidson time the release perfectly. A shell burst 40 feet below the B-17's nose. Shrapnel punched through the thin aluminum skin, severing hydraulic lines. The landing gear dropped partially, creating massive drag. The aircraft slowed to 135 knots. Zeamer added power on his 3 functioning engines. The increased thrust loaded additional stress on the damaged wing. The second C-47 reached release point. Paratroopers streamed from the door, their canopies blossoming white against the green valley. They fell toward their designated landing zone, guided by the orange smoke that remained clearly visible despite the anti-aircraft fire. Zeamer maintained his orbit over the drop zone. The mission profile called for the Pathfinder to remain stationed until all transports completed their drops, providing continuous navigation reference and relaying weather updates. The burning engine had finally exhausted its fuel supply. The flames died to sullen red embers glowing in the nacelle wreckage, but the structural damage was complete. The wing had lost 30% of its strength. The third C-47 dropped its load, then the fourth. Anti-aircraft fire intensified as German gunners realized the drop pattern. Shells burst among the descending paratroopers. Zeamer watched men die in their harnesses, canopies collapsing as shrapnel tore through the silk. But the majority reached the ground intact, landing within 200 yards of their intended zone, exactly as planned. The fifth transport began its run. A shell burst directly beneath the C-47's tail, severing elevator control cables. The aircraft pitched up violently, then recovered as the pilot wrestled it level using trim tabs. But the maneuver disrupted the drop. Paratroopers fell 200 yards long, outside the marked zone. Walsh immediately transmitted corrections to the sixth and final C-47. The pilot adjusted his release point, compensating for the wind shift that had affected the previous aircraft. His paratroopers landed inside the primary zone. 218 men on the ground, 197 inside the designated landing zone. Acceptable scatter for a daylight combat drop. The Pathfinder mission was complete. Zeamer turned for home. The damaged B-17 climbed slowly to 15,000 feet, the maximum altitude the compromised wing structure could sustain. The flight to Allied-controlled territory would take 43 minutes. Quinn examined the wing damage from the fuselage window. The main spar showed visible stress cracks. The aircraft might hold together, it might not. "Anyone want to bail out over friendly territory?" Zeamer asked on the intercom. No judgment. 10 voices answered negative. The crew stayed. They brought the burning aircraft home. The B-17 touched down at RAF Aldermaston at 11:47 hours, 3 hours, and 17 minutes after takeoff. Ground crews swarmed the aircraft, staring at the devastated No. 3 engine and the heat-buckled wing structure. The pylon had torn halfway through the wing spar. Stress analysis determined the aircraft had been perhaps 5 minutes from catastrophic structural failure when it landed. The B-17 was scrapped for parts. It never flew again. Of the 218 paratroopers dropped at Dragoon, 23 died from anti-aircraft fire during descent or in the first hour of ground combat. The remaining 195 secured their objectives within 3 hours. They captured the German communications center intact, seized the bridge over the Argens River before demolition charges could be detonated, and established roadblocks that prevented Wehrmacht reinforcements from reaching the invasion beaches. Post-operation analysis credited the successful drop with preventing an estimated 400 Allied casualties during the amphibious phase. The backup Pathfinder aircraft finally became airborne 90 minutes after Zeamer's mission ended. It wasn't needed. Zeamer's crew received no immediate recognition. The mission report, filed by the operations officer at Aldermaston, noted the engine fire and successful marking, but characterized the decision to continue as within acceptable risk parameters given mission criticality. Standard procedure for completed Pathfinder operations. 6 weeks later, Major General Robert Frederick, commanding the 1st Airborne Task Force, reviewed casualty reports from Operation Dragoon and compared them to previous airborne operations. The Dragoonian drop showed significantly lower losses than Normandy's nighttime operations or Sicily's chaotic scattering. He requested details on the Pathfinder execution. When Frederick learned about the engine fire and Zeamer's decision to remain over the drop zone, despite the anti-aircraft fire and structural damage, he personally drafted a Medal of Honor recommendation. The citation read, in part, Captain Zeamer's voluntary decision to continue his mission despite catastrophic damage to his aircraft, at extreme risk to himself and his crew, directly ensured the successful placement of airborne forces whose actions prevented an estimated 400 American casualties during subsequent landing operations. The recommendation died in committee. Zeamer had already received the Medal of Honor for the Bucha raid in 1943. Air Force policy prohibited awarding the decoration twice to the same individual, regardless of merit. He received the Distinguished Service Cross instead. The crew received Distinguished Flying Crosses. In the military's mathematics of valor, saving 200 lives rated below Zeamer's previous heroism. Post-war analysis by the Air Force Tactical Center examined Pathfinder operations throughout 1944 and 1945. They documented 17 instances where Pathfinder aircraft aborted missions due to mechanical failures, enemy action, or weather. In 12 of those cases, the subsequent transport drops failed completely, with paratrooper casualties exceeding 50%. The study concluded that Pathfinder mission success directly correlated with reduced casualties in airborne operations by a factor of 4 to 1. The 1951 revision of Air Force Tactical Doctrine included a new section on Pathfinder mission protocols. It acknowledged that crew survival, while paramount in bomber operations, could not be the sole determining factor in specialized navigation missions, where alternative capabilities did not exist. The regulation cited one example without naming individuals. August 9, 1944, Dragoon. The mythology of military aviation celebrates the lone fighter ace, the bomber pilot who brings his crew home against impossible odds, the test pilot who pushes aircraft beyond their limits. These stories resonate because they're simple. One person, one aircraft, one moment of extraordinary skill or courage. Zeamer's decision over Dragoon doesn't fit that narrative. His choice meant risking 10 lives to save 218. The mathematics appear straightforward, but mathematics can't account for the weight of ordering your crew to stay in a burning aircraft. It can't measure the psychological cost of watching a wing buckle and choosing to maintain course anyway. It can't quantify the difference between acceptable risk and calculated suicide. The Pathfinder aircraft that morning carried more than smoke markers and navigation equipment. It carried the burden of decision-making in wartime, where every choice involves balancing immediate survival against larger consequences. Real pilots don't cry, the old saying insists, but real pilots make decisions that haunt them for decades afterward. One burning engine, one crew that stayed, one marked drop zone that put 200 men exactly where they needed to be. The aircraft was scrapped. The wing spar that held together for those final minutes was cut apart and studied by engineers trying to understand why it didn't fail. Sometimes the most important question isn't why something broke, it's why it held, and whether you could make the same choice when your hand was on the alarm.